worthy to be trusted with the secret to limitless power, to become the Dragon Warrior?
I don't know.
Master Oogway. Well, to be fair, if there was one character that was able to top Shen, it was only ever going to be him. We all know how much we love Shen and how important he is, but Oogway is a figure that I really think needs to be acknowledged a little bit more in this franchise. I can assume that, apart from maybe some Tai Lung loyalists, I can't think of anyone who would say they could actively dislike Oogway. He is the Kung Fu master in these movies. He taught many other masters and students, including Shifu and the members of the Kung Fu Council, the latter of which before Oogway were only street fighters. Not much is known about his earlier years, but we do know that it happened a long time ago. His background states that the character himself isn't even Chinese. He travelled to China at a much younger age from the Galapagos Islands, which makes sense given that he is a Galapagos tortoise, and tortoise is exactly what Oogway means in Mandarin. His mind was full of questions about the universe and desperate to seek answers. Sort of like the Riddler, but with a lot less killing. He searched all over the world for knowledge before settling into China. He overlooked the place that would be later known to be the Valley of Peace, and apparently its beauty was enough to move him to tears, and thus that very spot would be known as the Pool of Sacred Tears. Apparently after doing so much good for the citizens who lived there, they built the Jade Palace in his honour, at which point Oogway planted a peach tree to commemorate that very moment. More on that a little later. I think that on a first glance his role was mainly that to provide wisdom and some comedic relief, but Oogway manages to balance out his humorous moments and uses them very well, either as a deliberate way to relieve the tension of the scene itself for the benefit of other characters and not just the audience, or more so as a way to subtly give advice. In the first film, we see him in his present-day role, mainly as the master to Shifu, who is not only his student, but unlike many others, he actually shows Shifu how to actually teach Kung Fu and pass on the knowledge, not just practice it. He's known Shifu since he was a child, but always rather touchingly referring to him as an old friend, despite many of the flaws that he himself can notice in him. He chooses Po to be the Dragon Warrior for many reasons, but it's not just because China needs him to save the day, but he knows that Shifu also needs him just as much. He sees that Shifu hasn't been in the best state since the whole Tai Lung fiasco. Now that he's coming back, he needs to be shown where he's going wrong and ultimately bring himself peace. Even though obviously Po can't do all of that, there are things Shifu needs to see for himself. But he also knew that Po needed help in keeping focus and not giving up on his own goals. It comes into this very touching scene between the two of them. I just love how he humours him while still listening to what he has to say, culminating in one of the easily the best lines of the movie.
Quit, don't quit. Noodles, don't noodles. You are too concerned with what was and what will be. There's a saying, yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present.
This is a brilliant line. I also love all the subtle touches like him dropping the peach in Po's hand and him leaving the lantern behind after he came up with it. Oogway does seem to be the kind of character who can notice what's wrong, walk up to you, and he'll always find something intelligent or helpful words to say that'll make you feel better or almost resolve the problem altogether. The scene between them was simple, but it was more than enough for Po to regain his determination. The first time I watched this on my own, then later I watched the movie again with my mum. She loved that quote so much she decided to put it on her phone. I can remember her specifically saying, "I like him, he's my favourite character." At which point all I could think to myself was, oh bugger, she's not going to like what's coming up later. I'm not giving much away at this point when I tell you that Oogway dies, we all know it. I think that scene proved to be a massive eye-opener since a lot of people grew to like him so much with what little scenes he had. I think his death was the moment where the movie went from enjoyable to actually very surprising and absolutely brilliant. I guess when a character dies, it lets you know that things can get darker, but when it's the death of a very likeable supporting character, it lets you know that nobody's actually safe. But not to the point where it gets too dark and mean-spirited for you to really get invested. And as I said earlier, it made me wonder that Shifu could actually die as well. Even in the second film, there is a lot more death in it. But getting back on track, the entire scene leading up to it was just brilliant, simply because the dialogue between Oogway and Shifu. Going from a simple discussion to conflicting ideas, some funny moments, and it all works because you can see the great chemistry these two characters have. Even with their disagreements comes a great deal of respect for each other. Shifu obviously panicking because of the current events, and Oogway attempts to reassure him using quite the clever analogy. Now, I will admit, the first few times I watched this, I couldn't quite interpret the symbolism behind the peach. It took me a long time, but I finally managed to get it. Oogway uses the peach as representation for Po, which of course translates to him saying, "You won't get anything that you used to from Po, but instead you should appreciate the qualities that are already presented in him. This is what you're given, no matter how much you try to intervene or change things." Not only that, but the peach symbolism only gets more complex. Remember when Mantis was giving Po acupuncture, claiming that it was difficult for him to find all the nerve points? Well, Po's physical stature is more round and soft than anything else, just like a peach. As previously mentioned, Po has a very strong flow of chi that helps him recover from most attacks that others can die from. Even the strongest of the five couldn't be helped against Tai Lung's nerve attack, while Po could easily withstand it. So his soft, round body combined with his chi are what attributed to his great strength, hence why Oogway makes the comparison between the two of them. So in other words, a peach actually did defeat Tai Lung. And in the midst of their disagreement, Shifu planted a new peach tree without even realizing, which we see begin to sprout after the end credits of the movie. The tree being especially important to Oogway in not only how he uses it in his words of wisdom, but also the fact that his staff was made from its wood and his death involved him disappearing into peach blossoms. The blossoms and peaches often play an important role in Chinese culture, and since the wood of a peach tree is said to ward off evil, this could explain why Shifu began to lose the fight with Tai Lung after his staff broke. What makes the conversation more enjoyable is that there isn't any music until the very end. I really like scenes in films, especially animated films, where they can allow themselves to just be quiet and sort of rest on the atmosphere and thematic resonance. Not to mention the scenery is just so beautiful. The stars, the moon and the lighting are just lush. Then again, I am a sucker for a starry night environment. Not only is the main struggle presented in Shifu, but if you look carefully, Oogway has his own struggles to deal with in that scene himself. He knows that he has to die soon, and it's probably very difficult for him, as he knows that Shifu isn't fully ready to understand everything or help himself. You can see this in his eyes when he begs Shifu to believe, even though he can only leave him with the answer, "I'll try." He knows that's all he can really go on, and the rest of the scene from there is stunning. The musical piece that plays during that scene is probably my favourite in any of these films, and if the amount of covers on YouTube has proved anything, it's clearly a lot of other people's favourite as well. Speaking of which, time for some trivia. Remember that snail sidekick I passingly mentioned earlier on? Apparently they had some symbolic reason behind him, but the main reason you can see him in some earlier concept art of Oogway is because somebody commented on the early concept art of Oogway that Nicholas Marlette drew and said that he looked like a snail. So we put the real snail at the end of the staff as a gag way of saying, no he doesn't. Oogway's neck was apparently going to be a lot longer, but they shrunk it down due to camera constraints. His personality went through a few drastic changes as well. At one point he was going to be a much sterner mob boss personality, and then another time he was going to act as a sort of creepy granddad that kept trying to pinch his cheeks. That's another thing. I don't have Oogway at number 1 just because I think he's like the Dalai Lama of the Kung Fu Panda universe. I have him here because I do think he has a great personality. He can kick your ass into the middle of next week, but he's still very compassionate and understanding. He isn't quick-tempered but knows when to react. He has his moments where he seems a bit daffy, but he still comes across as the smartest person in the room. And out of all the characters, he might be the funniest. The scenes I mentioned earlier were all great examples of that. Now, even though he's dead, he still somehow manages to provide great wisdom and kick ass. Some have even speculated that Oogway was the Dragon Warrior long before Po ever was. Since in this one little ditty, they explained how when Oogway first came, he had the ability to see light in the darkest cave and even hear a butterfly's wing beat. All of which apparently Po would be able to do once he became the Dragon Warrior. It makes sense to me. After all, in China, tortoises are believed to hold supernatural powers, are seen as symbols of persistence and constant effort towards success, and are thought to contain the secrets of heaven. See how that applies? Also, tortoise, reptile, dragon, it works. You get the feeling that Oogway is aware of his abilities and it must bring its disadvantages. He knows he can't be in control all the time and therefore can't foresee everything, which he amusingly states himself. He knows all he can do is respond when the situation unfolds. Which leads me to look at the half-hour prequel special, called Secrets of the Masters, detailing the rise of the Kung Fu Council Masters from the second movie. I was not expecting Oogway to show up in this special at all, once again voiced by Randall Duke Kim as he did in the movies.
I can't tell you how many people love your voice and love your character. And
I love this character. Oogway is an entity, a character that I can only aspire to. He's like what I would want to be as I get older.
And boy was I excited to see him again, in stylized 2D animation nonetheless. It was cool for a number of reasons. It meant more exposure for the Wu sisters, who at this point were very obscure missing characters who had gained some more popularity. But Oogway was easily the best thing about it. His wise words and jokes were just as good as they were in the films. As mentioned, the Masters were only street fighters before, so Oogway's own brand of persuasion, combined with screwing around with them, proved to be just what they needed. He doesn't outright lie to them, but I love how in his own way he doesn't quite explain the truth fully, saying it in a way that he knows they'll interpret it the wrong way. So, is there any fault I can find with Oogway? Well, sadly, there might be one big one. Many fans have wondered whether Oogway was indirectly responsible for Tai Lung's life going so badly, and that he should have done more to prevent this. I mean, with Shifu, you can recognise it from his view and how personally involved he was. You know what he was trying to do before it went wrong. But with Oogway, he saw this coming, and you really do feel like he should have done more to help Tai Lung and Shifu. If he sensed evil in Tai Lung, then why didn't he do anything until things were already far too late? Why didn't he just take Shifu or Tai Lung aside to talk about what he sensed, or even tell Shifu what he was doing wrong? I mean, yes, a lot of good did come from the events that unfolded. However, that's still one life getting ruined in the process. I know it wasn't personal, but it seemed a little reckless. If Oogway had approached the situation differently, then it could have ended better. It's not like with Lord Shen and Soothsayer, where she was way too late to resolve the matter. Oogway seemed like he had more than enough time and chances to intervene. Granted, Tai Lung was shown to have delusions of grandeur, which I'm sure didn't help matters. But if he did try to talk to them both about this, then neither of them would have been surprised by the outcome at least. So, was this a reckless mistake on Oogway's part, or just something that needed to happen? Personally, I can't make up my mind on the matter, but I'm sure most of you are already set in your ways about the situation. Hell, I think you could apply his words towards the situation directly back at Lord Shen as well. It seems that no matter how many different philosophies you bring to the table, Oogway's most favoured one is there are no accidents, meaning that things tend to happen for much bigger reasons than expected. Which does touch upon themes like fate and determinalism, but they are rather complicated subjects. Such as the case of how Tai Lung got free and every other story stemming from that. Meaning a lot of the characters I've talked about all end up coming back to Oogway in some form or another. In fact, if you look at many things in the background, some of them tend to have their own backstories directly relating back to Oogway, further showing how he has this great influence on this movie's universe. For instance, the rope bridge has actually an interesting backstory behind it if you choose to look it up. And to the TV series' credit, at least for the most part, they keep using Oogway as this very important figure and try to expand on the things he's done. Speaking of which, I highly recommend the episode Ghost of Oogway, in which Randall Duke Kim once again reprises his role before Po, which inadvertently creates some hostile tension between Shifu and Po, as they soon see how they view each other more differently. Not to mention the twist in the episode was pretty decent. The idea of seeing and hearing more of Oogway is always great to me. In fact, at the very end of the second movie, I thought that was going to be him. Tell me I'm not the only one who thought this. Then now, with the release of the Chinese trailer for the third film, it seems I'm going to get my wish. As we catch glimpses of Oogway on a boat with Po in this golden ethereal plane, and of course the standout scene of the trailer involving the new villain, Kai, lifting up the gigantic statue of Oogway and using it to demolish the Jade Palace right before Shifu's eyes. Apart from the spectacular collateral damage, the moment itself is perhaps more intensified when you take into account the amount of symbolic and emotional resonance of the new villain committing this tasteless and violating act by using one tribute of Oogway to reduce the other and Shifu's home to rubble in front of this horrified and defeated eyes, as a means to assert his dominance and power over these figures and let them know just how vulnerable he makes them, with such little effort on his part. Yeah, this is going to be a very big moment. Because of Oogway's pleasant attitude, incredible skill, cultured mind, and brilliant words of wisdom, sure, you can't win them all, but I'm still very proud to call Oogway the #1 Kung Fu Panda character.